Anyway, we'll start it there. The mountains quake at him, and the earth's hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence. Yea, the world and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before his indignation, and who can abide the fierceness of his anger? His fury poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust him. But with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. Now, we have a kind of a limitation on us that we can only speak the words that we are, know. We have some of the different languages. If you've ever studied different languages, they have many words that we can't really comprehend in English. It means certain things, and we may not even be able to do that. Well, God, that's why Nahum, he's trying to describe him in the words that he knows, and in how we relate as humans, how things happen, how he gets angry, he gets jealous, and all these different things. And he's good, and he's a stronghold for us. But we can't even imagine some of the things that he's seeing or in this vision, because he was given a prophecy, and the way those prophecies usually take is a vision. And so he's given this, tells us in this that the Lord slow to anger, great in power, will not at all acquit the wicked. Nahum begins by considering the character of God who brings judgment. He tells us he's jealous for us. He won't acquit the wicked, meaning he will take care of the wicked, but it's going to be in his time, in his place. It's not going to be us. We may feel like we're not being judged correctly, but we just can't even figure what God's thinking or what he has in mind for us. So it says, never once has he pardoned an unpunished sin, not in all the years of the Most High, not in all the days of his right hand has he once blotted out sin without punishment. So that's talking about God's not going to acquit the wicked. They're going to pay one of these days. God also has control of the atmosphere, where he talks about the whirlwind and the storm and all that, the fire. He can control that. We see the destruction that happens with that, and the storms and the tornadoes that we see. But and just to understand that he controls that. Now, that doesn't mean he sends these things down upon us. The world is in a place, and the atmosphere works on itself. Sometimes he'll send things, and sometimes it's going to happen. I mean, we're in a world, and it's, you're going to have floods, you're going to have this, that, and the other. That's not saying that particular one is a judgment.
Right.
But it does tell us sometimes that God does send a judgment upon them, like the flood was a judgment upon the earth back in Noah's days. It says, how important is it to know that the Lord is good? God is good in his very being. It's his very nature to be good. He is good independently. Nobody will help him to be good. He's eternally and unchangeably good. Good in each one of his persons or characters, the divine persons. He's good in all of his acts of grace, and he's good in all his plans and purposes for our life. A lot of times we get in our mind, we think, we know what's good for us, but he may have something better for us, and we take the lesser of it, and we don't take the better of it if we just wait a little further upon him. The overflowing flood was fulfilled both figuratively and literally. It says, according to secular accounts, during the final days of Nineveh, a rebel army of the Medes and the Persians and the Arabians and Babylonians, unusually heavy rains caused the rivers to flood, and it undermined the city's walls. Now, if you remember the story, of Jonah in the city of Nineveh, the wall, it's kind of like uh, oh, Joshua in the his march around the city. The walls were so thick that they could drive chariots on top of it, which is 10 or 12 feet wide. So these were great, imposing, and they would keep people out. But when the floods came and it washed the base out from the walls, then the walls fell, and the Babylonians and them took over because there's holes in their defense. They couldn't go anywhere else. Verse 9 says, "What do you imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. For while we be folden together as thorns, and while they are drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble, fully dry. There is one come out of thee that imagineth evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor." It said Nineveh was ripe for devastating judgment. It was not a harsh chastening. This was utter destruction to come upon the city. It was promised back in Jonah's day, but they repented, and for 100 years they lived that way. But now they've gone back on their ways, and they're starting to, they'd gotten to the same place that they were, so God was going to take care of them. It says, they shall be devoured like stubble that's fully dried. The dry leftover stalks of grass are ready to be devoured by the smallest flames. We saw how out in California, those fires, when it gets dry, boy, they just spread like crazy. They just go.
Yeah.
Verse 12, "Thus saith the Lord, though they be quiet, and likewise many, yet thus shall they be cut down. And when he shall pass through, though I have afflicted thee, I will afflict thee no more. For now will I break his yoke off thee, and will burst thy bonds in sunder." The Assyrians was one that was going to take, they were given problems to Judah. Later on, the Babylonians took over. Like I said, they broke through with all their armies, the different ones that was helping them. But he was going to do this at this particular time to give them some peace, because the people of Israel, or people of Judah, was constantly being badgered by the Assyrians. It said, "Couldn't the believer today who's trapped and oppressed by sin ask God to break the yoke of sin? It must be done with a complete willingness to walk in the freedom that God gives, but only God can break off the power of the things that bind us." So many times we can try it, but if we try something, it's our will may not be good enough. It just, we fall back into our old routines, whatever it is. But it's got to be from God. Verse 14 talks about the end of the wicked. "And the Lord hath given a commandment concerning thee, that no more of thy name be sown out of the house of thy gods will I cut off the graven image and the molten image. I will make the grave, for thou art vile." They didn't even know until, I think, 1860, I think it was. It may say in here, I read that somewhere. I don't know if it's in here or in another commentary I was reading. The Nineveh even exists. They couldn't confirm most of this because there was no record of it.
Really?
Yeah, they found this city, and if you go look on Google or whatever, the ancient city of Nineveh, they'll show you some of the remains that they found that was in around. And go back to that map here. Share. Yep. If you look up here, Nineveh, Babylon's down here. Right up here in this area, this doesn't go all the way back to before Abraham, but right in here, Nineveh was actually founded by the want to call him the nincompoop. What is that that we talked about so much? No, not God. Nimrod.
Nimrod.
Yeah,
Nincompoop.
Nimrod. Darla's helping me in there, trying to tell
Okay.
me. I can't hear her with my headphones on very well. But it was right up here in this area too. They were talking about it that, they didn't even believe it existed until they were digging around and found found parts of this city. And then they started seeing things, and they found his castle, the king's castle, and all the area and the big walls that they had. And they started looking back, and sure enough, it matched what the Bible had shown. So, or had told us about Nineveh, both in Jonah and in Nahum here. So that's kind of what it's meaning here is your name shall be perpetuated no longer. They didn't even know it existed. And just, 100 years ago or so, they came back and found that it was there. I will dig your grave for you a while. In this vivid, almost extreme imagery, God warns Nineveh of its coming judgment and destruction. Verse 15 says, behold the mountains, the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publish peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. The mountains of the feet of whom who brings good tidings proclaims peace. This is a contrast between the fate of the godly and the wicked, and it's nothing new, but good news to Nahum and the people of God. Isaiah 52:7 uses a similar expression. By it, Isaiah marvels at the beauty of the feet of him who brings the good news. Isaiah also teaches that the good news is coming of the Messiah. Nahum, good news is the defeat of the enemy of God's people. Revelation 17 and 18 describe the fall of Babylon, representing the world system and all of its support structure. And 18:9 through 19 shows how the kings and merchants of the earth mourned the fall of Babylon, like we show, and that's just a little bit further south there. But Revelation 18:20 through 9 and 6 show how heaven rejoiced over the fall of this world system. What was mourned on earth was applauded in heaven, and the same principle applies in Nahum's prophecy of Nineveh's fall. It says rejoicing is not in this context gloating at the misfortune of others. Rather, it's understanding that God is being vindicated because of his promises. He is true, and he will bring about what he has said. It says, O Judah, keep your appointed feast, perform your vows, knowing the grace and mercy of God to his people should not make the believer careless in obedience. It should make the believer more careful to obey every word of the Lord. And that's all I had for tonight.
Well, that was very interesting.
It is. And it's a small, quick chapter, so we don't have to